The morning mist still clings to the shattered tree line of a French countryside, its silence interrupted only by the distant rumble of engines. A German Panther commander, Hauptmann Weiss, stands beside his immobilized tank, its left track torn off by a mine 2 days earlier. The machine gun nests around him have fallen quiet, their crews exhausted from a night of waiting for resupply that never came. The radio crackles with the same message it has repeated for 36 hours. Spare parts delayed. Hold position. Weiss scans the road ahead and freezes. Out of the low fog, a column of Shermans emerges. Not new replacements, but the same tanks his unit had knocked out the previous afternoon. They wear fresh track links, their hulls still bearing the scorch marks of yesterday's battle. But their engines roar with renewed life. American mechanics ride on the back, grease still on their hands, rifles slung casually as if maintenance and combat belong in the same breath. One of Weiss's crew mutters under his breath, "They repaired it?" Overnight? The Panther still hasn't moved an inch, and this moment, quiet, almost unreal, marks the beginning of a realization that will spread through the German armored corps like a cold whisper. America wasn't just sending tanks, it was sending a system. By the summer of 1944, the Western Front had become a brutal stage of armored clashes unlike anything the world had seen before. After the success of the Normandy landings, Allied forces pushed inland, stretching their supply lines across the rugged countryside of France. German commanders, hardened by years of war on both Eastern and Western fronts, observed the advancing American tanks with a mix of curiosity and contempt. To them, the M4 Sherman was a symbol of American excess, lightly armored, mass-produced, and, in their eyes, tactically inferior to the Tigers and Panthers of the Wehrmacht. German crews often joked that the Sherman was a Ronson lighter, it lights every time, referencing its tendency to ignite when hit. They boasted about the range and accuracy of the Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun, which could knock out a Sherman before the American crew even saw the flash from its barrel. Yet behind those jokes was a quiet truth the Germans refused to acknowledge. The Sherman was never designed to fight like a Panther. Where German tanks were precision instruments built for superiority in single combat, the Sherman was engineered for an entirely different purpose: availability. American military doctrine did not envision tank duels fought in isolated fields. U.S. strategy was rooted in momentum, mobility, and sustained pressure. A Sherman that was disabled wasn't viewed as a loss, it was a temporary setback. Crews were trained not just to fight, but to recover, repair, and return to battle in the shortest time possible. This philosophy stood in stark contrast to the German approach, where a damaged Panther often meant a logistical nightmare. On paper, German armor was terrifying. The Tiger Y, with its 100mm frontal armor and deadly 88mm KWK-36 cannon, could destroy a Sherman at over 2,000 meters. The Panther, with sloped armor and high-velocity rounds, was considered one of the most advanced tanks of the war. But both machines shared a fatal weakness. They were only as strong as the supply lines feeding them. Every mile the Germans retreated, every bridge destroyed by Allied bombers, and every rail line severed by resistance fighters pushed spare parts, fuel, and ammunition further away from the front. A Panther immobilized by a broken transmission was just as useless as a tank destroyed in combat, but far more costly to recover. The U.S. command understood something fundamental. A tank that isn't running is just scrap metal on treads. And so while the Germans poured engineering brilliance into crafting superior machines, the Americans built an ecosystem capable of replacing tracks, engines, and turret motors faster than German crews could even submit a request to headquarters. Soon, patterns began to emerge on the battlefield. Shermans that were marked as destroyed in German reports reappeared within 24 hours. Tank crews who thought they had eliminated an enemy armored platoon found themselves facing the same vehicles again by sunrise. The Panthers and Tigers they commanded, however, remained vulnerable, not on the battlefield but in the depots, waiting for fuel or spare gearboxes stuck miles behind the front. What the Germans didn't yet understand was that American logistics was not just support, it was a weapon, silent and relentless, and that weapon was about to show its full power. To understand why Sherman tanks returned to the battlefield while German armor lay stranded, one must look beyond the front lines, deep into the arteries of supply that sustained each army. Just weeks after the Normandy breakout, the U.S. Army launched the Red Ball Express, a high-speed convoy system using thousands of trucks moving day and night across designated supply routes. These convoys carried everything: fuel, ammunition, spare parts, even replacement engines, straight from ports like Cherbourg directly to frontline units. Over 6,000 vehicles operated simultaneously, each one tasked with a singular mission: keep the front moving. The key was standardization. Every Sherman, regardless of its factory, shared nearly identical components, meaning a fuel pump from one unit could be fitted onto any other Sherman without modification. A damaged track link could be replaced with one pulled straight from a supply truck. Engines were mounted on modular frames, so entire power units could be swapped in hours rather than days. American mechanics didn't spend time machining parts. They simply replaced entire sections and sent the damaged pieces back to depots for later refurbishment. The German system, by contrast, was a rigid and fragile structure strained by Allied air superiority and internal disorder. Panthers had multiple gearbox variants, often incompatible with one another. Tigers required specialized tools and trained fitters for even minor repairs. Fuel was rationed. Replacement road wheels or transmission parts, when available, moved slowly on rail lines constantly bombed by Allied aircraft. A Panther crew could report a mechanical issue and wait up to a week for confirmation, only to be told to abandon the vehicle if recovery was deemed too risky. By late 1944, over 50% of German armored losses were non-combat related. Vehicles immobilized by breakdowns, clogged filters, engine fires, or lack of fuel, then abandoned and blown up by their crews to prevent capture. In contrast, U.S. tank battalions routinely reported over 80% operational readiness even after intense engagements. The reason wasn't luck or superior armor, it was logistics. Alongside the Red Ball Express were frontline maintenance units, mobile workshops equipped with welding gear, cranes, and machine tools. These units could set up repair zones just miles behind the fighting, pulling damaged Shermans off the line, fixing them rapidly, and pushing them back into action within a day. Some battalion records even describe engines being replaced in under 4 hours, while German reports mention Panthers immobilized for 3 days due to a single thrown track, waiting for a replacement link that never arrived. American doctrine treated mobility and uptime as sacred principles. The Quartermaster Corps and ordnance units were given near-total autonomy to requisition supplies, reroute trucks, and cannibalize non-operational vehicles for parts. German command structures, burdened by bureaucracy and the chain of approval stretching back to Berlin, could not react with the same speed, a German officer noted bitterly in a post-war interview. For every Tiger we lost to enemy fire, we lost 2 to mud, distance, or lack of parts. Meanwhile, the Americans fought with machines that never seemed to stay dead. That sentiment, once dismissed as frustration, would soon become an undeniable strategic truth. Because logistics, not armor thickness, was about to decide the fate of entire armored divisions. The stage was set, not for a clash of tank designs, but for a collision between industrial momentum and mechanical stagnation. While tank crews drew glory and recognition, there was another group of men whose contribution rarely made it into war reports: the frontline mechanics. In U.S. armored divisions, these soldiers worked in conditions nearly as dangerous as the combat troops themselves. They operated under artillery fire in freezing rain, often lying face down in mud while unbolting damaged suspension arms or refitting broken track segments. These men weren't just repairmen. They were combat engineers with wrenches instead of rifles. A Sherman disabled at dusk could be recovered under the cover of darkness, hauled by M32 recovery tanks or 2 1-2-ton trucks, and delivered to a forward repair area lit by shielded lamps to avoid drawing enemy fire. While German Panther crews might wait days for a specialized team with factory training, American mechanics were already trained to improvise under fire. German war diaries reveal a stark contrast. Many German maintenance personnel were positioned far behind the front and required formal authorization to enter combat zones for recovery. U.S. units, however, empowered mechanics to act immediately. Authority was decentralized. If a vehicle could be repaired, they did it. If not, they stripped it for parts without waiting for an officer's signature. This difference in flexibility turned every U.S. maintenance zone into a hive of activity, while many German units sat idle, waiting for orders that would never come. In war, hesitation costs more than bullets. The Americans removed hesitation from the equation. The Sherman was often mocked for its relatively thin armor and lower caliber gun. German crews called it the Tommy Cooker for its tendency to ignite when penetrated. But while German tanks were marvels of engineering, they were too refined for war's brutal pace. A Tiger I required over 300,000 man-hours to produce. It contained complex overlapping interleaved road wheels and used a transmission that, while powerful, overheated frequently under field conditions. Shermans, by contrast, were built in factories optimized for speed. Manufacturing one Sherman took less than 10% of the labor required for a Tiger. But more importantly, every Sherman was built to accept the same core components. This standardization meant that a single crate of parts arriving via the Red Ball Express could service dozens of tanks from entirely different battalions. In German units, crates had to be matched to specific chassis variants, production batches, and even factory codes. The German quest for perfection created machines that excelled in controlled tests, but struggled in the chaos of sustained warfare. Sherman design embraced a different creed: make it good enough, and make a lot of it. History would prove which philosophy endured. German tank units followed a traditional approach: fight until mechanical failure or fuel depletion, then pull back for large-scale recovery operations when possible. Many tanks were abandoned not due to combat hits but because they simply couldn't move. American doctrine redefined the rhythm of armored warfare. Shermans were cycled like rotating assets. If one was hit, another moved forward while the damaged hull was towed back for repair. This created a constant presence of armor on the battlefield. German intelligence reports began to remark on this unnerving pattern. No matter how many Shermans were knocked out, they always seemed to come back. Some U.S. divisions even practiced forward cannibalization, stripping one damaged tank to repair 3 others. It wasn't elegant, but it was brutally efficient. Meanwhile, German crews lacked the authority and spare resources to cannibalize operational Panthers without high-level approval. The result was a psychological shift. German crews, once confident that each kill reduced enemy strength, started to notice that Sherman losses barely affected American armored pressure. The battlefield began to feel like fighting water. Knock it down and it flows back around you. In the early engagements of 1944, German Panther and Tiger crews openly mocked the Americans. They referred to the Sherman as the coffin on tracks and believed that superior optics, armor, and firepower would guarantee German dominance. Reports sent back to German command were filled with confidence, claiming that the Sherman was an easy kill at range. But by autumn, the tone changed. Field reports from the Panzer Lehr Division mention a disturbing trend. The American tanks appear to be replaced faster than we can account for. Their availability is unnatural. Another German officer, Oberleutnant Franz Fiebig, wrote after the fighting near Aachen, "We know we destroy them. We see the wrecks. Yet the next day, fresh Shermans arrive, sometimes with the same tactical markings. It is as if they do not record losses." German morale was tied to visible destruction. Every burning Sherman felt like progress, until crews realized those kills meant nothing if the enemy simply rolled out more within hours. Respect replaced mockery, not because the Sherman became deadlier, but because it never stopped coming. Germany entered World War II with one major assumption: that wars would be decided by elite units and technologically superior machines. The United States entered with a different belief. Wars are won by production lines, rail networks, and repair depots. American factories in Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland operated around the clock. Assembly lines were designed with modular replacement in mind, meaning a complete Sherman engine pack could be shipped, installed, and the damaged one sent back for reconditioning like a reusable cartridge. Spare barrels, bogie wheels, radio sets, even turret rings were produced in quantities that dwarfed German output. German factories, meanwhile, were scattered under constant bombing and often paused production waiting for precision-machined components. Even when new Panthers were finished, getting them to the front required fuel and rail lines that no longer existed in reliable capacity. Many Panthers were lost before firing a single shot, stranded on transport trains destroyed by Allied fighter bombers. In this war, The factory floor was as decisive as the battlefield. And while German engineering produced marvels, American assembly lines produced victory. Tank warfare is not only a clash of steel, it is a clash of morale. A German tank crew that destroyed an enemy vehicle expected a moment of psychological relief. A kill was proof of superiority, proof that training and discipline paid off. But when the same platoon saw an almost identical Sherman bearing the same tactical markings return within hours, that relief turned into a cold realization. The enemy is not counting losses the same way we are. Captured German soldiers spoke of the shock this caused. One recalled near St. Lo, "When a Sherman burned, we cheered. When it came back repaired the next morning, we fell silent." This cycle of destruction and rapid return eroded the German sense of progress. They began to understand that they were trading elite machinery for time, while the Americans were trading time for endless machinery. And in a prolonged war, time favors the one who can replace faster, not the one who kills cleaner. By winter, German tank aces were no longer asking how many Shermans they could knock out. They were asking a far darker question: what difference does it make? The frost of December 1944 clung to every surface like a silent warning. The German High Command had launched what would become their last great offensive on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge. Over 400 German tanks and assault guns, including Panthers, Tigers, and Jagd Panthers, pushed through the Ardennes in a desperate attempt to split Allied lines and force a negotiated peace. At first, momentum favored the Germans. Fog grounded Allied aircraft, and surprise allowed German armor to punch deep into thin American lines. Panther crews advanced with confidence, their engines roaring through the forests. For a moment, it appeared that German steel and precision engineering might turn back the tide. But beneath this surge lay a fatal flaw. Fuel and spare parts were already running thin. Reports from Panzer, Brigade 150 described tanks advancing with only half their fuel capacity, gambling that captured American depots would replenish them. Mechanics followed far behind, and many units entered combat without their maintenance trains, a decision that would soon prove catastrophic. On the American side, Sherman units were being hit hard. Ambushes in the forests, hidden anti-tank guns, and Tiger tanks firing from hull-down positions inflicted severe damage. In some sectors, entire platoons of Shermans were knocked out. To German observers, the sight of dozens of burning American tanks confirmed everything they believed about Sherman inferiority. But then something happened the Germans did not anticipate. As their Panthers pressed forward, American repair and logistics teams surged into action behind the lines. The Red Ball Express rerouted south, pushing supply convoys under relentless artillery fire. Maintenance depots were established in frozen fields, covered in snow-camouflaged tarps, where American mechanics, cold, exhausted, but relentless, began pulling engines, welding patch armor, and hammering track pins back into place. German radio intercepts caught a phrase repeated by multiple Allied units: "Hold them. Tanks are coming back." A Panther company operating near St. Vith reported that after destroying a Sherman column, the same tanks reappeared 18 hours later, repaired, refitted, and supported by fresh infantry. The German commander noted in disbelief, "Our Tigers have not moved since yesterday due to frozen road wheels. The Americans lose tanks and replace them faster than we can refuel." As snow continued to fall, the contrast between doctrines became painfully clear. Panthers sat in tree lines, engines idling to prevent freezing, burning precious fuel. Shermans, meanwhile, cycled through combat and repair like a living machine, sustained by a logistical network that refused to break. Then came the breaking point. Near Bastogne, a Panther battalion reported that out of 45 tanks, only 12 remained operational after 3 days. Not because of enemy fire, but due to track failures, frozen transmissions, and fuel starvation. American armored divisions, taking equal or greater losses in direct engagements, continued to field over 70% operational strength, their numbers replenished by convoys delivering spare parts faster than German bullets could remove them from the field. The battle was no longer about firepower. It had become a contest of endurance, and only one side had prepared for that kind of war. The turning point became unmistakable in the final days of December. German armored spearheads, once roaring with confidence, began to sputter and slow not because of enemy firepower, but because of something far more merciless: the absence of fuel and spare parts. A Panther tank, feared by Allied crews for its deadly long-range gun, became nothing more than a steel bunker when its engine seized. Many German crews, faced with mechanical breakdowns, abandoned their tanks intact, setting demolition charges or disabling the breach before escaping on foot. The once proud armored formations of the Wehrmacht were now leaving behind rows of silent tanks buried in snow, too expensive to lose and impossible to recover. American reconnaissance units, advancing cautiously, reported an unusual sight. Dozens of German tanks standing perfectly still, turrets frozen in place, their crews nowhere to be seen. One U.S. officer wrote in his journal, "They looked like monuments, beautiful machines without life. We walked past them, and for the first time I pitied them." Meanwhile, Shermans kept returning. Behind the lines, ordnance companies converted bombed-out barns and churchyards into temporary workshops. Fuel trucks arrived in long columns, their engines rumbling like a heartbeat that kept the armored divisions alive. Spare road wheels, transmissions, track sections, even replacement turret motors were unloaded directly onto the mud and ice, distributed to tank crews like ammunition. If a Sherman couldn't be recovered by truck, a team of mechanics went forward with cutting torches and tool crates, repairing it under fire. Reports indicate that in some sectors, Shermans were knocked out in the morning and returned by evening, their hulls still blackened but their engines roaring once more. A German anti-tank crew, positioned along a road near Hufelies, described seeing a tank with a large hole in its side armor reappear just hours after being hit. One of them muttered, "These machines, they do not die the way ours do." The psychological break spread quietly through German ranks. Panzer commanders trained to count kills as a measure of success now found those numbers meaningless. No matter how many Shermans they destroyed, the American tide never receded. The Panther crews realized a truth their doctrine had never prepared them for. Logistics could resurrect an army faster than superior firepower could destroy it. By New Year's Day, German armored divisions had lost more vehicles to breakdowns and fuel shortages than to direct combat. American divisions, despite similar battlefield attrition, maintained operational readiness rates above 75%. The Ardennes, once seen as Germany's last chance for victory, had instead become a graveyard of stalled machines and broken supply lines. In a final intelligence briefing, a German staff officer summarized the collapse with a single sentence: "We did not lose the tanks. We lost the roads that kept them alive." That statement marked more than a tactical defeat. It was the moment German command began to understand that the war was no longer about who had the best tank, but who could keep their tanks moving. When the guns finally fell silent across the Ardennes, the snow-covered battleground told a story more revealing than any report. Scattered across roads, fields, and forest clearings lay hundreds of abandoned German tanks, not burned-out wrecks from Allied fire, but mechanical casualties of a system stretched beyond breaking. Allied recovery units noted a pattern. Many Panthers and Tigers were found with their engines intact, guns loaded, and armor unbreached. Some still had spare track links strapped to their hulls, but inspection revealed the same underlying problem. Critical parts had failed, and replacements had never arrived. In many cases, German crews left notes or scrawled chalk messages on their hulls: "Kein Benzin," "No fuel," "Getriebe defect," "Transmission broken." Shermans, however, told a different story. Even in damaged state, American crews marked their vehicles for recovery, attaching colored flags to indicate whether they required engine replacement, track repair, or weapon servicing. Recovery teams moved quickly, using M31 and M32 ARV, armored recovery vehicles, to haul them back for repair. Some Shermans were patched with field armor, spare track links welded to the front plates, a crude but effective form of reinforcement that mechanics adopted on the spot. Without waiting for official directives, operational. Reports compiled after the battle showed stark numbers. German armored readiness after 2 weeks of combat: below 35%. American armored readiness in the same time frame: consistently above 70%. These figures reflect more than efficiency. They reveal a fundamental difference in doctrine. German forces treated tanks as elite assets, meant to deliver decisive strikes. Americans treated tanks as consumables within a larger logistical engine, like ammunition that could be spent, recovered, and reissued. Captured German officers, interrogated after the battle, struggled to reconcile this philosophy. One Panzer commander admitted, "We believed killing a tank removed it from the war." The Americans did not agree with this idea. The U.S. logistical machine had proven something revolutionary: availability as a weapon, and a repaired tank returning to battle can be more demoralizing than any new unit arriving fresh. By the end of January, American divisions were advancing again, their Sherman columns rolling past the frozen carcasses of German armor. The Wehrmacht had launched its last armored gamble, and lost not to fire, but to the relentless efficiency of a supply chain that moved faster than destruction. In the weeks following the failed German offensive, Allied intelligence teams swept through abandoned positions, cataloging every vehicle, supply cache, and command post left behind. What they uncovered painted a clear picture, not just of defeat, but of systemic collapse. American analysts noted that German tank crews had begun stripping parts from their own vehicles mid-battle, a desperate attempt to keep at least a fraction of their force moving. One Panther was found with its final drive assembly removed, tracks half disassembled in the snow. Nearby, a Tiger lay motionless, engine hatch open, tools frozen in place beside it. The crew had attempted a field repair, but abandoned the effort when they realized no spare components were coming. In contrast, when U.S. armor broke down, it was rarely left behind. Dedicated maintenance battalions, mobile workshops mounted on trucks, followed closely behind frontline units. These mechanics, often overlooked in historical narratives, operated with industrial discipline. They logged every breakdown, documented parts usage, and forwarded reports to command so that replacement parts were automatically queued at depots before units even requested them. One mechanic from the 3rd Armored Division recalled in an interview, "We didn't wait for orders. If a Sherman threw a track at 900, by noon we had the parts. By evening it was rolling again. The Germans fought hard, no question, but they fought alone. We had an army behind us." This summed up the reality of the Ardennes. The German tank was a weapon. The American tank was part of a system. The effect on morale was unmistakable. German prisoners repeatedly made the same observation during interrogation: you destroy one Sherman and 2 more appear. For German crews, every breakdown felt like the end. For American crews, a breakdown was an inconvenience, not a death sentence. Crews often joked that the only thing that can kill a Sherman is paperwork, referring to occasional bureaucratic delays, not enemy fire. As U.S. forces pushed eastward, recovery columns grew into convoys, hauling damaged tanks back to improvised forward repair points. In one instance near the town of Houffalize, an entire field was converted into a temporary tank hospital, rows upon rows of Shermans undergoing engine swaps, gun alignments, and track refits like patients in triage. Meanwhile, German Panzers that had once symbolized armored superiority stood abandoned. Their long guns pointed uselessly toward roads they could no longer contest. These figures were not just statistics. They were a death sentence for the concept of lightning war. Blitzkrieg relied on momentum. Momentum required continuous mechanical function. Without logistics and repair infrastructure, even the most feared tanks in the world became immobile bunkers. As American columns rolled east, Sherman crews passed wreck after wreck of German armor, each one a monument to a doctrine that could win battles, but not sustain a war. The Ardennes marked the moment the world understood a new truth. Wars are no longer won by the tanks that fire the most shots, but by the armies that can keep their tanks firing the longest. As the winter snows thawed and the roads of Europe turned from ice to mud, the last echoes of the Battle of the Bulge faded into history. But what remained was not simply a record of killed tanks and captured towns. It was the revelation of a new kind of warfare. For years, the world had feared the silhouette of the German Tiger, its massive gun and thick armor becoming symbols of unstoppable force. But here in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, that myth met an industrial reality. The Tiger could dominate a battlefield. The Sherman could dominate a war, because wars are not won by perfect machines. Wars are won by machines that can be built fast, fixed fast, and return to combat faster than the enemy can destroy them. Historians often speak of secret weapons, elite divisions, and daring battlefield maneuvers. Yet when Allied command reviewed the Ardennes campaign, their conclusion was blunt. Our greatest weapon was not the Sherman tank. It was the ability to deliver another one by sunrise. Behind every U.S. armored division stood a network of steel mills in Pennsylvania engine, plants in Detroit logistics officers calculating fuel requirements down to the gallon mechanics, working under blackout lamps in frozen fields, turning wrenches instead of firing rifles, while German high command gambled everything on a final blow. The United States waged a war of endurance, a war fought not only on the front line, but on assembly lines, in workshops, on railroads, and in supply convoys that stretched across continents. The Battle of the Bulge was more than a failed offensive. It was a turning point in global military doctrine. The Wehrmacht relied on elite formations, believing quality alone could compensate for scarcity. The United States embraced scale and recovery, proving that a lesser tank supported by logistics could outfight a superior one that stood alone. Generals would later describe the Ardennes as the moment warfare shifted from tactics to logistics, from heroic maneuvers to relentless sustainment. Even German officers, writing after the war, acknowledged this transformation. One former Panzer commander wrote in his memoir, "We fought battles. The Americans ran a war. A long column of Shermans rumbles forward, engines roaring back to life after field repairs. Snow shakes off their hulls as mechanics wave them through, grease still on their hands. Ahead lies Germany. Behind them lie the shattered remains of the Tiger and Panther, still formidable in design, but no longer relevant in the face of a war machine that could not be halted." As the camera pulls back, the message becomes clear. Strength is not in the steel of a tank. Strength is in the system that brings that tank back again, and again, and again.